big culture shock comes if you're going to Asia. So, Thailand and Malaysia are two places, Vietnam, three places, if you will, that are popular for the low cost of living. But right, you're going to have the culture hurdles there, which some people are up for the adventure. And if you're not, there's plenty of other places in the world to take a look at.
Welcome back. Today we have Lief Simon. Lief Simon is one of the co-founders of Live and Invest Overseas. Lief has lived and worked in 7 countries on 5 continents and traveled to more than 75 countries. His real estate investment career began with a $5,000 down payment on a 3-flat building in Chicago. From there, he turned his attention overseas and has bought properties in 24 countries, including France, Croatia, Portugal, Ireland, Belize, Spain, Argentina, Cyprus, Romania, and beyond. Lief has established residency in 3 countries and has acquired a second passport from Ireland. In 2008, Lief and his wife Kathleen Peddicord, who's also a co-founder of Live and Invest Overseas, purchased an acreage in Panama and installed underground electricity, water, and internet to build a forever family home. Lief's latest book, Cowboy Millionaire, The New American Pioneer, collects all his wisdom that he has learned in 3 decades of living and investing outside of the U.S. He also offers advice on international diversification in his twice-weekly Offshore Living Letter and his monthly Simon Letter dispatches. Now, this fits nicely into our global retirement perspectives. It talks about multiple different countries and things to think about when you live or invest or retire overseas. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, thanks, Lief, for joining us. Everybody, this is Lief Simon. Lief is with Live and Invest Overseas. It's always best, Lief, if you give us a bit of a background about yourself. I've already given you an introduction, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words?
Sure. So, long story short, I've wanted to live internationally since high school. So I went to the Thunderbird for my master's degree and started working overseas right after that for an oil company. Lived in a few places, Chad, Kazakhstan, Argentina, that in places where oil is, what aren't the funnest places to be, but got a good experience there. And then I've been out of the United States now for the last 28 years with my wife, Kathleen Peddicord, who's my partner at Live and Invest Overseas. And we've lived in Ireland, Paris, and Panama. And in fact, I spent about 6 months in Nicaragua while we were married, also working for helping out with a project that the company we worked for owned, real estate project. So yeah, a lot of moving around, but we've been in Panama now for the last 18 years full time, and we're splitting our time now between Paris and Panama.
Okay. So when I was reading your bio, it indicated that you had invested in 7 countries on 5 continents and traveled to more than 75 countries. If you were to look
Yeah.
at all those things, what's the similarities and what's the differences?
So it's living in 7 countries. Some of the ones I just named. We've actually bought property in 24 countries.
Oh, okay. Just a few more.
Which I know the numbers get confusing for depending on what they are. I understand. And so real estate is my big focus mostly. So I invested in real estate in Chicago, made some good money, and then when we moved overseas, I continued looking at real estate opportunities for ourselves, and now I look at it for our readers. And the one for real estate specifically, one big thing that people need to get out of their heads, including their accountants, is North Americans think it's illegal, especially Americans, maybe not Canadians so much. They're a little more international than many Americans, but that it's illegal for Americans to own property in another country. And it's just not true. Some countries have restrictions, but it's not illegal on U.S. or Canadian side. So when I have people come to me, they say, "Oh, I found that opportunity, took that opportunity that you sent us to my accountant, and he said I couldn't do it because it's illegal. Like you need another accountant." But the process of owning is fairly straightforward. You know, land ownership rules are strong in well in the countries that we talk about, I talk about, um, and the main thing to pay attention to is title. So some countries have um, we would call it rights of possession type of land, which you can buy, but you're not going to get a clean title. So that's the one thing in certain Latin American countries to really pay attention to.
Okay, so why so many countries? Why not just buy in the US? And now it sounded like you were doing a bit of traveling, so I suspect that that's where part of that came from. But
So the big underlying premise of my publications that I put out is diversification. And
Mhm.
so the the best example of and I have a colleague friend, who is in the stock is this broker, so he's in the stock business, and he has spoken at conferences in the past. And he comes up to me and says, "Lee, you know you're not really diversified." Well, I am diversified on the real estate side
Mhm.
because I own in a bunch of countries in different currencies. Not so much on the stock portfolio side. I've been trying to rectify that the last few years. But owning properties in different countries, you're exposed to different economics. So, if one country is up, another country is down. 2008 was down for everybody around the world. Real estate became a bubble globally. Um, and each market reacted differently. So you saw in Spain, 70% decline in prices, especially along the Mediterranean coast, because mostly that market was foreign driven. And so, the foreigners weren't buying anymore, and the pre-construction people who were putting money down weren't completing their purchases. Um, the other extreme was Panama, where prices on average dropped maybe 20 or 25% and recovered really quickly. So they were back to normal by, I would say, even 2010, where a market like Portugal wasn't back to the previous levels until 2015. So diversification is a big reason for me. Lifestyle is a big reason as well, as you're alluding to. So we have properties. Again, we split our time now between Paris and Panama. We have properties in Paris and Panama that we use personally. We have other investment properties that we use when we have time, and then just pure investment properties elsewhere.
Okay. You had indicated in your bio that you lived in Ireland for a while with your wife.
Yeah,
And do you have a second passport from them?
yeah.
Okay, was it?
So we did, as I say, we did our time in Ireland, and so we were there long enough to get naturalized. Our
Okay.
son was born there, so he was born with Irish citizenship. Um, but we were there long enough to get naturalized, and that gave us a second passport. And that gets back to just this mantra of diversification that I do talk about. Having more than one residency, more than one passport gives you options in the world. A U.S. or Canadian passport is a strong travel document, but it doesn't get you into every country visa free. And in other countries, they have access charges, for lack of a better term. Whereas our Irish passport is handy for like Brazil, comes and goes with the visa for necessary, not for U.S. passport holders, but for Ireland, you don't need a visa before getting there. You can just show up. So that was the pre-pandemic pitch for having a second passport and second residencies. The pandemic was great for this concept that I've been talking about for 20 years, because we had the Irish passport and Panama residency, and we were in France when the world shut down. And so we had options. If we could have found a plane, and we probably could have, but it didn't look too hard, we could have gotten back to Panama from France or gone to the US from France. Because we had our Irish passport, we could stay in France, no problem. And then during that year, 2020, we were able to head back to the States to help my mother with some things, and stayed for a few months, and then rather come down to Panama, since we're already basically halfway there, because Panama was the shutdown was very strict in Panama. Men and women could go out every other day. So men was what was Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Women were Monday, Wednesday, Friday for a 2 hour period. So we didn't want to come back into that situation. And so we went back to France, which by the time we went back, had loosened up a bit, and it was never quite as bad as in Panama. And then eventually came back to Panama in January 2021. But we were able to do all of that moving around because of the Irish passport and being able to get back into the EU at a time when they weren't accepting, tourists, if you will, or anybody that didn't have citizenship or residency.
Is the Irish passport part of the EU collective? Okay.
Yeah, so Ireland is part of the EU, and I've been saying for years that the Irish passport is the best second passport for a North American. Others would say Portugal or other random countries. But having an EU passport is beneficial. The Irish passport, now that the UK has left the European Union, is the best because Irish citizens can also live and work in the UK. There's a special rule between Ireland and the UK. So Ireland gives you just that one more country that you can hop into without any issues.
Okay. Looking at all these places, they have different cultures. Is there a culture that's better for people that want to retire to those countries?
So yeah, the first question most people ask is, how much English is spoken there, right? If you don't speak a second language already, you're older, you may not want to learn a second language. You will learn some of the second language, no matter how hard you try not to, moving somewhere. But there are English-speaking countries that you can move to. Belize in the Americas. Now, Belize is a bit more third world, if we're still allowed to use that term, than the rest of Central America even, but they speak English. So you can get by without learning a new language. Then Portugal's become very popular, and the Portuguese, there's a lot of English spoken in Portugal because of tourism and also because of their long-time connection with the UK. So you can get by, but you're going to, over time, need to learn some Portuguese just to make your life easier. Ireland, of course, speaks English, but they have a much higher threshold for getting legal residency at this point. Okay. So how much language is spoken? What are the expat communities available so that you can, you meet others English-speaking people? And then the raw culture differences in Latin America. Most people from North America have some familiarity with the Latin culture. The big culture shock comes if you're going to Asia. So, Thailand and Malaysia are two places, Vietnam, three places, if you will, that are popular for the low cost of living. But right, you're going to have the culture hurdles there, which some people are up for the adventure. And if you're not, there's plenty of other places in the world to take a look at.
Do you have properties in Asia?
Not anymore, no.
Okay,
I've
why
been
not?
invested in Thailand and the Philippines in the past, but sold those.
Why not?
Well, it was time to sell them. The one was a development project that finished. But the one issue in Asia is being able to own property. So Thailand has rules that you can't own land freehold. You can own land leasehold, or you can foreigners can own up to 49% of a condo building, so that ultimately foreigners don't own more than 49% of the underlying land. That same rule applies in the Philippines. Malaysia is a little bit easier. Foreigners can own property directly there, freehold title. And then Vietnam changes the rules, or has changed the rules in the past when I was looking at it. So I'm not sure the current rules. Other countries, Cambodia, I have an Australian friend who owns property in Cambodia, and they may have recently changed the rules. And don't pay, again, that much attention to Asia property at the moment. But he was owning property held by a friend. So it's not quite as secure as you might want it to be if that friend decides he doesn't like you anymore. So it's harder to invest in real estate in Asia unless you're doing kind of with the developer, which is more risky. But owning property outright, you focus on the Philippines and Thailand and Malaysia.
Okay, so that's the ownership side of things. You said something with regards to Ireland having a higher bar for residency. What's
Hmm.
the residency rules like across the various different countries?
So and we just wrote about this actually this week. You probably heard of the golden visas, and the golden visas are where a country will allow you to buy a property and get
Oh,
residency
okay.
with very loose rules on how much time you have to spend in the country. And Europe
Mhm.
is trying to eliminate these. Portugal has changed theirs. Spain has eliminated theirs. Greece has increased the minimum investment requirement. And that allows you to get the legal residency by buying a property anywhere from 250,000 euros to 800,000 euros, I guess, depending on the country. And that's a lot of people think that's the only way to get residency overseas is making an investment. It's not. Many countries, especially Latin American countries, but also European countries and Thailand and the Philippines as well, have just income thresholds. So Panama, for example, if you have a pension that can be Social Security or your Canadian RRSP, or what are
Yep.
the initials are up there,
Yep.
of $1,000, 1,000 US or more a month, you could qualify for the pensionado visa in Panama and get permanent residency in Panama um, through that. Um, Portugal has a similar rule, but it's not just tied to pensions, it's any passive income. And it's about 12 to 1,500 euros for a single and maybe 1,700 euros for a couple to qualify for residency in Portugal. Ireland, the rack rate is
Rack.
50,000 euros. The rack rate, using the hotel term, sorry. So the listed amount is 50,000 euros
Okay.
per person. Now we have Irish immigration attorneys that say there's some, for a couple, it could be less than 100,000 euros, and there's some flexibility there if you own your own property and things. But just on the surface for a single, it's 50,000 euros of income a year that you have to prove, plus some other um, asset levels that basically ensure that you won't become homeless um, in Ireland. And the biggest thing is none of these countries want somebody moving there to become a ward of the state, so
Hmm.
or a burden on the
And
state.
make use of the
Um,
social fabric.
exactly.
Right.
And so Ireland decided that they really didn't want any more uh, retiree immigrants. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and so that 50,000 euro was put in place, which makes it harder for many retirees because that's kind of where, a good retirement, somebody with a pension and Social Security in the US might be making, $4,000 to $6,000 a month. They're right at that level, depending on the euro exchange rate.
So you're somebody it sounds like you're primarily based out of Panama. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're here most of the year. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm hearing a lot of people here in US and Canada migrating or retiring to Panama, as opposed to originally I was here in Costa Rica like 15, 20 years ago, that sort of thing.
Right.
Why why Panama now all of a sudden? Why not some of the other Latin American countries or South American countries?
So, yeah, we, we won't get into why not Costa Rica anymore, unless you want to. But the why Panama part is excellent infrastructure. It's the Panama City is the most developed city in Central America.
Mm,
You come in and it looks like Miami. It has high rises. It um, has a metro system that they're expanding. It's an international hub, both for travel and for international companies. And it's also a banking center. So there's a lot of business transacted in Panama, which means there's lots of good services, especially in Panama City, good restaurants, things like that. Panama has that easy to qualify for pensionado visa, and from a real estate investment perspective, it has a lot going for it because of the business travelers, the tourism, which Panama hasn't been pushing really, but it's grown on its own, and they're starting to push it more themselves. Um, so you can find short-term rentals with good yields, et cetera. And Panama City has more and more companies with their Latin American headquarters. because of the incentives and other factors that the government can offer, like stability. That's the one thing. Panama is very stable from a political perspective, always improving their infrastructure, and so it's a hub for Latinos looking to place money out of their unstable countries like Venezuela.
Hmm.
Europeans come, North Americans come. So it has people coming from all directions that help keep it just keep business churning in Panama.
Okay. You hinted at something with regards to Costa Rica. Why
Hmm.
not Costa Rica?
Well, the main reason why not Costa Rica, they years ago decided they didn't really want retirees anymore, so they altered their pensionado visa program, and they focus mostly on tourism. They just want people to come and leave their money and go, which is kind of short-sighted because retirees living in the country are spending money every month, not just a splash of money getting off of a cruise ship or coming for a week's vacation. But
Hmm.
the other thing with Costa Rica is, and the road has finally been built for a long time, for 20 years, there was a new highway from San Jose to the coast on maps even, that wasn't built. Costa Rica just never kept up with improving their infrastructure, although prices for property and the cost of living there increased. Costa Ricans come over the border to David in Panama to go shopping because it's less expensive than Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is, the Irish would say, was no longer value for money.
Right.
So you could go to Nicaragua, where the infrastructure wasn't much worse, but the cost of living was much less, or you could come to Panama, where the cost of living was the same or less, depending on where you are, but the infrastructure is much better. So there's still plenty of expats who do go to Costa Rica, retire to Costa Rica or snowbird there. But from our perspective, Panama is the better deal.
So there's two paths here I could take. Let me close off one area, then I'll go to infrastructure. Um, so it sounds like you have an Irish passport, you have property in Paris that you make use of regularly, and you spend the majority of your time in Panama. Why Panama as opposed to Paris or Ireland?
So, well, our business, that's a great question that my wife would probably like to hear my answer on. But Panama is where our business, main business office is. So Panama City is where the bulk of our staff is. And we have our own real estate project in Panama that we're developing. So we need to be here for that. And why not Ireland? My wife would like to buy a house again in Ireland so we could spend more time in Ireland. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of both time and money at this point.
Right.
And on the Paris side, right now our daughter and granddaughters are living there, so that's one reason to go back. But we love Paris. If we were restricted to one place, couldn't ever leave, um, destination, it would be Paris. We would choose Paris in that scenario
Because
over
of family.
over Panama. Well, because it's Paris.
Oh,
The
okay.
family's there. I don't think the family's going to leave anytime soon, but because it's Paris, and people get confused because Paris is a international city. Panama City is international, but it has a different vibe. And then where we are out here on the coast of Panama is much more rural. But we like the contrast, and we kind of get bored after a while. So, you know, we spend a month or two
Okay.
in Paris, come back to Panama, head up to the States for a few weeks. But we've structured our life at this point to be able to move around and enjoy the best the world has to offer.
Okay. Now let me go to the infrastructure side. I understand you bought and built in Panama. What was that experience like putting in the infrastructure for a place that you've built? Was there any issues? What's the quality of the workmanship? That sort of thing.
Yeah, painful is the simple answer. So for our project, putting the development project, putting in the electricity, dealing with the electric company, the electric utility was and still remains painful. We're not done with the project. We're extending the electricity into the different phases, et cetera. Quality of the work, again, we're in a rural area, so it's hard to find good people, but the people you do find that know what they're doing are good. So that's been good. Building houses is a different animal, really anywhere in the world. You got to pay attention to the developer, make sure, or the contractor, make sure they don't get ahead of you uh, on payments. I would say just like you do, even in the U.S., we renovated my mom's house, did a small renovation in her house a few years ago, and we had to stay on top of that contractor. And he disappeared for 2 days.
Hmm.
And we've learned, he started another job. And this is how the contractors everywhere in the world that we've done renovations have been. They get your contract, they come and start your project, and then they go, next week to start somebody else's project. And then they just keep, you know,
It's
slow rolling all the different projects.
it's interesting here in Vancouver, along the coast here of BC, there's all these islands, and people like buying a parcel of land on some of these smaller islands and then building up a home or something like that. But they always run into the same problem. We call it island time. Yes, we're here in
Right.
Vancouver. Your contractors here, they come in, they do their work, they go, and by and large, the work is of consistent quality. Trying to build something onto those Gulf Islands is you find somebody and they'll show up maybe, or maybe not, or they've gone fishing or something like that. And it's like it takes a lot longer, and you really have to push people to get stuff done. Hence the term
Right.
island time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
And yeah, so I think it's the same with contractors everywhere. So our recommendation, if you're doing a renovation or building in Panama or somewhere else, you need to be there as much as possible. Trying to do it remotely will just uh, be more difficult.
okay. When you were looking at or are looking at all your various different properties, if you put your retirement hat on, somebody is deciding that they want to move away from the US, away from Canada, and I can understand with the weather the way it is right now. What are some of the things they should be thinking about?
Well, the one thing I guess to get out of people's heads, I mean, because North Americans like to own their house, but renting is perfectly okay. You can find furnished rentals, which gives you much more flexibility for moving around. And you moving to one country and getting legal residency doesn't have to be your last move. We have one colleague who he retired young, took early retirement from the company he was working for at 49. And that was, I'm looking at the calendar here, it was 26 years ago, 27 years ago. And he started in Ecuador, then he went to Uruguay, just to see what it was like. He and his wife moved there, then was close enough to Brazil that he started liking Brazil and he moved to Brazil. Then he came to Medellin, Colombia, and then he's then he moved to Mexico to split his time between Mexico and California, where his grandchildren are. And so he bought and sold in all those countries. But if you're renting, it's much easier to be mobile. So you don't have to own. And then if you are going to buy, it's just for pure lifestyle. Just don't over don't over specialize isn't the word I'm looking for, but um, you know, don't make it suited to just you. You want to have something that somebody else is going to want to buy in the future. I
Hmm.
use Michael Jordan's house in Chicago as an example. 'Cause I saw it listed for sale for, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years when he left Chicago. And it was by far the most expensive house in the neighborhood by multiples of the closest multi-million-dollar house. And it was Michael Jordan's house. It had a 23 on the front gate, an indoor
Oh,
basketball court. So it finally just sold recently in the last year to a
it's
guy
too
who's going to
personalized. Yeah.
it was too personalized. The guy's not going to live there. He's putting it up on Airbnb to charge people 100 grand a week to stay in Michael Jordan's house. Hopefully that works out for him.
Okay. Interesting. So you guys live and invest overseas. How God, so many questions. How focused is that, or how many retirees make use of it, and what are some of the common questions that they end up throwing at you?
So we have hundreds of thousands of readers to our free e-letter. So the free e-letter is the easiest way to just start learning more about this. And we focus on, I'd say, a dozen countries. We talk about 20, and that's always changing. We just came out with our 2026 uh, Overseas Retirement Index that focuses on actually destinations in the countries. And so first you've got to decide the country. So that's the first question people are looking at. So what
Hmm.
country makes sense for me, both from can I qualify for residency? And do I like the weather? And so a place like Panama really only has two places to go: the coast, where it's hot and humid, or the mountains.
Hmm.
A place like Portugal has more options for different climates. And so the biggest questions, once people start then honing down the locations, is the cost of living, which is an answer only they can provide, because
Hmm. Depends on
you
their
can spend,
budget.
yeah, if you're on a really tight budget, okay, but you can live, in Panama, you can live for on $1,000 a month. I can't, but someone else can. So it's just a matter of what your priorities are, and if you're how willing you are to live like a local, as we say, because a good salary in Panama is $1,000 a month. So there are plenty of people living here on that. Then healthcare is the next one after cost of living. Healthcare in any populated area except really Belize outside of the US is likely to be as good or better than the US. You can start, so Panama City, there's John Hopkins affiliated hospital. There are other large hospitals that have excellent doctors. They speak English. Um, Many of them speak English, not all of them. And a lot of them trained and went to school in the US. Get outside of the city, then you've got the provincial capitals. So that'll have, more healthcare. And then if you're in a more rural area, not dissimilar to the US, you're going to find, less options. Europe has excellent healthcare, but Colombia, Panama, Argentina, not only have excellent healthcare, but have a growing uh, healthcare tourism market. What travel tourism? I forget the term now, but medical tourism. That's the term. Sorry. As well as even places like Thailand, for example. So Thailand has excellent hospitals and a huge medical tourism industry. So then you've got to dig down into what are your actual healthcare concerns. One thing is prescriptions. So if you're on some unique, rare medicine from North America, is it available where you're going? That's very few people. So you've got to ask those questions. And um, and then if you've got then health insurance, everybody wants health insurance. Um, but there's restrictions on getting into new health insurance programs. So local programs in Panama, once you turn 60, you can't get local insurance anymore.
Hmm.
You can continue if you're already in, so you can just keep paying your premiums and you can go beyond 60. But if you're already past 60, they're not going to let you into the system. International programs generally have a get into age of 73. And then there are the national systems in Europe.
Sorry,
Those can be fine.
sorry, let me
Yeah.
interrupt you. You mentioned 73. Explain that one more time.
So there are international health insurance policies like Bupa, and I forget some of the others. There's plenty of them. HTH is still around, um, that will insure you living overseas, and you can decide whether to include the U.S. or not in
Hmm.
your coverage. But if you don't sign up with them by 73, they're not going to let you in either. So it's just the same thing as the locals, but it's just a different age bracket. Um, and then the national systems, like Portugal, it's a catch 22. You need to have a health insurance policy to get your residency in Portugal. But once you have your residency in Portugal, all residents are automatically eligible for the national healthcare system.
Hmm.
And you may want to maintain the health insurance after that, because it's not completely free, but also the private system is just faster. Anywhere where there's a public system, if there's a private system alongside of it, the private system is faster. We saw that in Ireland when we were living there.
Hmm.
So how are you going to, the friends we know, they're still around, but they retired back in the mid 80s when they were in their mid 30s. And they maintained international health insurance policy for a while, but then realized health care is so cheap. And they spent a lot of time in Thailand, where at the time, 30 years ago, they were spending, $4 for a doctor's visit. They decided to self-insure. So they took the money they were going to put into to pay the health insurance company into a separate account because they were young and healthy,
Hmm.
and built up a nest egg to self-insure separate from their living nest egg. So there's ways to manage the insurance side of it, but the truth of the matter is, and you don't want something catastrophic to wipe out your retirement nest egg, but we talk about it here in Panama all the time. Someone we know fell and broke their hip right after they canceled their local Panama health insurance, which was bad timing because they'd just gone on to Medicare and thought they'd do everything up in the States that was required, but they didn't think about an accident. Fell and broke their hip, and had to have it fixed, replaced, whatever happened here in Panama. It was like $19,000, where that same thing in the US would have cost more than $19,000, possibly even if you had insurance.
Hmm.
So you got to think it through and manage your risk the best way for your situation.
It's interesting. Here in Canada, I have a neighbor. She's probably now in her early 80s, but she broke her hip back in her early 70s, skiing up on one of the local mountains. And she had it repaired and everything through the public system. So no out-of-pocket
So
cost.
so no cost. And right,
Yeah.
and so for Americans and Canadians, there's two key differentiating factors. Taxes. So Americans are going to be
Yeah.
taxed no matter where they live. They're going to file a tax return. Canadians, you can separate from Canada and just be a resident of the other country and not be spending time in Canada. But then the healthcare system kicks in as well. So out of the country for more than 6 months, you're no longer part of the healthcare system. And I'm not Canadian, so these are rules I've picked up from
Yep.
Canadian
Yep.
colleagues over the years. So that's why I finally realized we see so many Canadian snowbirds. They come down to a place like Panama or even Costa Rica or Belize or whatever for the cold months, and then they go back to Canada for the nice months up there,
Mm.
and most, maybe not mostly, but definitely in part, so that they can maintain their Canadian health coverage.
Yeah. It's back east, the Ontario, Quebec areas, the Atlantic provinces. They were using Florida as their winter month haven, the snowbird
Yeah,
haven. But now, because of the instability and the tensions between the two countries, they're going further south into the Caribbean, into the Latin American areas. Here, we tend to go down to the west coast of Mexico, maybe a little bit further down. That's the reason why I brought up Costa Rica. We've talked
yeah.
a lot about the Latin America area, South America area, as well as Europe. We've only touched on the Asia Pacific. What's your thoughts, or what have you seen from that side of things?
So the other thing people ask about or think about are the grandkids. We've mentioned it a couple times.
Hmm.
And so the Asia's farther. That's the biggest issue with Asia. So coming from the west coast of
Yeah.
North America, it's flight to get to some of these places, and not so many direct flights either. So if you're not wanting to come back and forth to visit family, grandkids, or whatever, Asia can make more sense. The culture we mentioned, but the cost of living is super cheap. So Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam for sure. Malaysia isn't quite as cheap as those others, but it's the quality of life for what you're paying is definitely a better value. And the hiccup is, again, getting along with the real estate side is residency side. So Philippines and Thailand have a retiree visa, if you will, that with a pension or Social Security. Um, Malaysia has a My Second Home program that comes and goes, that has a fairly high threshold. Last I knew it was around 3,500 US to qualify for that. So there are ways to get residency. We get people ask about Australia and New Zealand. all the time, and they just don't want more people. So to get residency in those countries as a retiree is practically impossible unless you're uber wealthy and can make a large investment
Hmm.
or start a business there. So those are the challenges for Asia: distance and distance, property, and finding the place that you're comfortable with the culture.
Hmm. We haven't even touched on Africa or the Middle East or anything like that. I'm assuming
Yeah,
those,
that's interesting. You brought it up because we don't really think about it that much.
yeah.
But somebody mentioned it in a recent conference of ours, where we didn't talk about, during when we did a webinar for the Retire Index, and somebody said we didn't talk much about Africa. Right. It's not a big draw for North Americans. The African American is looking at it. I know there's one lady out there with a blog talking about Ghana. Real estate, again, being able to own real estate as a foreigner is a problem in many countries, they don't need old people. Some of them might want to retire, but there's no true pensionado program that I'm aware of in any of the countries. There are likely ways to get residency through income, but and then safety. So most of back to your question, what are some of the things people ask? Safety is another big concern for North Americans.
Hmm.
I think less and less so, considering how unsafe it can be in some places in North America right now. But the places we talk about are safe. We hear from people saying, "Oh, didn't you see the U.S. State Department's, it is has Costa Rica or Panama at a level 2?" I'm like, yes, I know that. I also know that France is a level 2, the UK is a level 2, Greenland is a level 2.
Yeah.
So you can look at the more detailed information, uh, and and then go and just be smart about it from a safety perspective. There are cities in the U.S., with neighborhoods that I wouldn't drive in the middle of the day with, a shotgun out the window. So every city in the world has places you shouldn't probably wander into. So don't go by what you see on the news or what you're reading from the State Department. Go check out the specific spot that you're looking to move to. Mexico is the only country that I'm aware of. There might be others that the U.S. State Department actually gives their travel uh, categories by state, by Mexican state. Otherwise, it's the whole country, and the whole country can't be unsafe.
Hmm.
Well, I guess, in a war-torn area, yes, but you're not going to find, yes, parts of Panama are unsafe, but the whole country is not unsafe. And the places that are unsafe aren't places that you're likely to even think about, like the Darien region, which is a mountainous region on the border with Colombia,
Hmm.
where the drug traffickers tend to come through.
You, the way you were talking, it almost goes to common misconceptions that
Yeah.
are associated with various different countries. What are some of the misconceptions people have? Like you
Oh,
had
well,
also earlier, you had mentioned that some people think that Americans aren't allowed to own property outside of the
right.
U.S., that sort of thing.
One, but related to that really is that Americans think if they get legal residency in another country, they'll lose their U.S. citizenship. And that's
Hmm.
just so far off the scale, it's hard for me to talk to those people sometimes. Residency isn't citizenship. And even if you can't really lose your citizenship unless you're from a war-torn country that ceases to exist or whatever, um, without having another citizenship to replace it. So Americans, getting residency somewhere has no effect on their citizenship. Getting naturalized at the moment, Americans are still allowed to have more than one citizenship. So that's one misconception about things, that people think that they'll lose their U.S. citizenship, or that residency means citizenship in the other country, which it does not. You can work towards that path depending on the rules, like we did in Ireland. So that's a big misconception. But I've lost the first part of that we were talking about.
Were just some of the different misconceptions that people have. So I had mentioned with regards to people buying property, U.S.
Right.
citizens, that sort of stuff. You
Yeah.
started
So
talking about citizenship.
Yeah. So the other big thing is just safety. So when
Yeah,
we started talking about Medellin, Colombia, what is it now, 16 years ago? People were writing into us to say, "You're out of your mind. Don't you know that that's, the drug capital of the world, blah, 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 blah," because all they know is Pablo Escobar and what they saw in the news, at that point, 20 years earlier.
right,
Escobar died in the late 90s, and Colombia by 2010 was um, very safe. Still had some FARC things going on in the mountains, but generally speaking, far from Medellin, which is where we focused and where we bought property, in fact. And even today, though, when we do a Colombia conference or talk about Colombia, people write in and tell us that we're out of our minds. Okay, if that's how you feel, then don't go to Colombia. There are plenty of other places to consider. But mostly I tell people get on the ground yourself. Because what you see on the news channels, the international news channels, I use CNN in this example regularly, um, is a snapshot of a day.
yeah,
And another example is Argentina in 2002, in December 2001, they had their big financial crisis decoupled from the US dollar. Currency went from 1 to 1 to 4 to 1 by the middle of next year. And I thought, because I'd lived there before with the drilling company, great opportunity for real estate. So I went to Buenos Aires. I was there in early 2002, and writing from the scenes, and people were writing saying, "You're crazy. It's dangerous there. I just saw, riots on the protests on CNN." And my response at that point was, "Yeah, I saw them too. I was standing, I drove by the judicial building where everybody was standing. Once the cameras left, they put their signs down, sat down and had their mate tea, and it was not an issue. The most dangerous, in air quotes here, protest I saw when I was there at that time was at night, with little old ladies would come out after they made their family dinner, and beat with pots and pans the boarded up banks, because the banks had shut down. A lot of them went out of business, and the currency. I mean, the people were suffering, fair enough, but it wasn't like people were dying in the streets.
hmm, interesting. Okay, so let's talk a bit about some of the things you're doing. You have a recent book, Cowboy Millionaire, the New American Pioneer. Talk to me about that. What's that going on?
So, it's mostly my story in that book, but the underlying premise is really, the American dream isn't dead. It's
Hmm.
just you gotta go out and find it. And so my wife and I found it in creating the lifestyle that we have and the opportunities that we found in different countries. We could have stayed in the U.S., I guess, probably would have been bored at some point, but done well in our careers, and I could have kept investing in U.S. real estate and all that. But we wanted something more
Right.
interesting, something more diverse. And so that's really what the Cowboy Millionaire is talking about, is just, expanding not only your investment portfolio, but also your lifestyle.
Okay. And then you have two, looks like newsletters that go out twice weekly, Offshore Living Letter and the monthly Simon Letter. Tell me about those.
Yeah, so those two fall into the offshore topic. So that's, second residency, second citizenships, again, asset diversification, asset protection. And so those are the topics that we cover: offshore banking, where to bank, how to move money, for investment and buying property, or diversifying your the currencies that you hold. And so the Offshore Living Letter is the free twice a week letter, and then the Simon Letter is the paid version, that
Mhm.
just gets into more detail and has um, more intense, I guess you will, articles about all of these topics,
Okay.
and trying to
No,
keep people up to date, because the rules change regularly for residency and for these golden visa programs that I mentioned earlier, and for citizen qualification. Portugal right now is talking about extending the 5-year residency requirement before you can apply for naturalization to 10 years. And so those we try to stay up on all those topics to keep our readers abreast.
Okay. And on the website for Live and Invest Overseas, first thing you see is a new book, I think it is, with regards to the best place to retire.
That's our 2026 retirement index. It should be a book. It's really thick, but it's our January overseas living letter issue.
Hmm.
And so if someone goes to the website and signs up this month, they'll get that index as well. And each year we do that index. We include 12 to 15 destinations um, and rank them using all the categories we kind of talked about: healthcare, infrastructure, cost of living, um, taxes. There's maybe 10 different categories that the team
Hmm.
rates for um, these destinations that are chosen by our editorial team each year. And so we don't do countries, we do destinations in countries because, as Kathy likes to say, you're not retiring to the United States. You're not even retiring to Florida. You're retiring to, Clearwater, Florida, or Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And so you need to thin slice it to get to each little place has its own uniqueness.
Cool. Cool. Well, Leif, I want to thank you for taking the time and talking. It's interesting. The more I talk to people about overseas locations, retiring, investing, that sort of stuff, the more my blinders are being pulled off. And that's why this is such an important conversation. Um, Thank you very much. For everybody
Thank
that's
you.
watching this, I'll put links to the newsletters, the book, and the website for Live and Invest Overseas at the bottom of this video. Anyway, Leif, thank you very much.
I appreciate it, Neil.
Okay.